Ready for a drink? Set aside the Jim Beam for something more obscure tonight. These are the most underrated bourbons of the year. 5 Trail Flagship Blend is technically a blended whiskey, but only 8% of the blend is single malt, while the rest contains various aged-straight bourbons, so you can probably let it slide. The entire blend has a Colorado spin, as it's proofed with water from the Rocky Mountains, making for even more of a distinct flavor. 5 Trail features 2 bourbons aged for 4 years apiece, one containing rye and one not, and one 12-year-old Kentucky bourbon. The result is a complex blend of warm flavors such as caramel, ginger, wood, and baking spices. This $60 bottle is one you'll want to enjoy straight on the rocks, or at the very least in an old-fashioned with the best ingredients. One fan of the blend wrote in a comment on the brand's Instagram page, "It's more than just a delicious drink, it's an experience."
Bourbon. Double on the rocks.
Grand Teton Distillery produces a number of spirits that are very much worth shelling out the cash for, but their private stock straight bourbon is the only one to hold the title of Idaho's oldest whiskey. The distillery ages its bourbon for 8 years in single barrels, so each bottle is complex and distinct in flavor. The mash bill also contains 20% rye, meaning there are flavors of bitter chocolate and light pepper present among the woody and vanilla notes. In general, this is a bourbon that channels the flavors and experience of homemade campfire s'mores in the best way. It's up to you to decide whether or not that experience is worth the $80 price tag, however. One fan writes on their Facebook page, "Flavorful and smooth. I'm glad I got a chance to taste it when my wife and I toured your distillery." Samuel Maverick Whiskey is a proud institution of San Antonio, Texas, with the distillery enjoying a prized location right by the historic Alamo Building. The brand honors the practices of traditional American bourbon, but with an added Texas twist with its latest release, Samuel Maverick Private Reserve Straight Bourbon Whiskey. It's a small batch limited release that is an ode to the brand's namesake. It was made and distilled on the site of prominent Texas politician Samuel Maverick's original home from the 1800s. Maverick Distillery only used 7 barrels of their 4-year-old reserve to make this particular bourbon, so it's a pretty exclusive sip at $75. The flavor features the warm and slightly sweet notes you'd expect from a bourbon, like caramel, chocolate, and vanilla, but with a twist that resembles smoky Texas barbecue. A bourbon from Brooklyn, New York? It can be done, and done well too. Take Widow Jane 10-year bourbon, for example. The brand uses a blend of straight bourbons aged for a decade. The distillers pay attention to detail by making this bourbon in 5-barrel batches and proofing it with water from the Rosendale mines in New York. The flavor of Widow Jane 10-year resembles that of a well-balanced old-fashioned, featuring fruity notes such as orange and cherry mixed with the warm flavors of vanilla and maple. It also has a pleasant spicy finish that adds even more depth, meaning that you'll want to sip this one slowly and straight up to appreciate everything that's going on inside. One Flaviar user wrote in a review, "I got to try a sampling of it, then choose to buy the bottle. It's probably one of my favorites, and it reminds me of those orange chocolate candies." Legent Bourbon feels like a perfect marriage between Kentucky bourbon and Japanese whiskey, thanks to a collaboration between Shinji Fukuyo and Fred No.
My name is Fred No. I'm a master distiller at Jim Beam.
The standout aspect of Legend is that some of the bourbon in this blend is finished in red wine and sherry casks to develop a deep flavor of fruit and aged wood. It's all meticulously blended together, creating a bottle that is layered with flavors and perfectly balanced. It has a slight peppery spice that meets rich flavors of dark chocolate-covered cherries. This bourbon is fairly priced at just over $40 a bottle as of October 2022, so it's an easy way to treat yourself to something new to expand your bourbon palate. One Master of Malt user wrote in their review, "Fantastic flavors, great blending. Only problem is that it is not a bourbon to mix with cola. Only way to enjoy it is straight up." Another recent release comes from the Block Distilling Company, and it's worth getting your hands on while you can. The brand is only releasing 700 bottles, and once it's gone, it's gone. Night Sweat Straight Bourbon Whiskey is bottled in bond, meaning it is aged for a minimum of 4 years and bottled at 100 proof, among other qualifications. The mash bill includes a blend of millet, malted barley, and a combination of yellow, blue, and red corn. Most of the grain comes from a farm associated with the Block's distilling practices, meaning they have even more control over what goes into their product. The result is a bourbon that is sweet like its honey color, with other earthy elements to make it feel more robust. The bottles sell for $90 each, but $10 from every sale goes to support the Marigold Project, which supports a variety of community and nonprofit organizations. It's a limited release worthy of splurging that also benefits a good cause. Another sweet bourbon with a lighter touch is I.W. Harper's 15-year-old Kentucky Straight Bourbon. The age adds plenty of depth to this 86-proof bourbon, but it isn't as boozy as some other options out there, which gives it a lighter mouthfeel. It's got a good balance, it's complex without being too overwhelming, and it really shows how age can really transform a corn-heavy bourbon into something truly unique. Some reviews on Flaviar suggest that you will definitely want to let this bourbon breathe a bit so it can really develop its best flavors. One says, "This bourbon in particular is a new favorite and makes drinking any of my other bourbons bourbon's much more difficult. This stuff is buttery and fruity, but not overwhelmingly so. Loads of flavor, and the finish is long and outstanding with very little burn. Pinhook Bourbon is about as Kentucky as it gets. Aside from producing some must-try bottles of bourbon, the brand also pairs each expression with a racing horse to further celebrate the state's culture. Pinhook Flagship Bourbon is one bottle worthy of a permanent spot on your bar shelf. This 2022 expression contains a corn-heavy mash bill, paired with a bit of rye and malted barley for added spice and unexpected fruity flavors. The bottle is aged for a minimum of 3 years, and it's paired with the horse named Bourbondini.
You're the new face of Guten Bourbon.
What is Guten Bourbon?
It's an urban German bourbon.
Am I just hungover, or are you talking like a Muppet?
The flavor is deep and almost resembles that of a pie. It's heavy with notes of peaches, honey, clove, and cinnamon. Plus, for just $32 a bottle at Total Wine, there's no excuse not to try it at least once. One review states, "Tried on recommendation requesting smooth, good-tasting bourbon. Did not disappoint. Ordering 3 more today." If bourbons that tend to be on the sweeter side aren't your thing, it may be worth exploring bottles with mash bills that contain other grains, such as wheat or rye, which add spicy and herbal elements to round out the flavor. One bottle that fits the bill is Pursuit United Bourbon, a 108 proof release made from a blend of bourbons that contain various levels of corn, rye, malted barley, and red winter wheat. The brand uses bourbon distilled in 3 different states, Kentucky, Tennessee, and New York, to truly make a release like no other. It's priced a bit higher at $65 a bottle, but it's one of those slow sippers worth taking the time to explore the various notes and flavors going on inside. One customer on Benny's Beverage Depot wrote, "This is one of the best bourbons I've ever had. What an incredible blend. Nicely done." Lux Row Distillers' line of Rebel Bourbon is another great brand to try if you want to explore the way slight adjustments to bourbon can have a major impact on the finished result. One standout from the line is Rebel's 10-year single barrel bourbon. The 100 proof bourbon is aged for a decade in the standard charred oak barrels, but the bottle is a demonstration of how quality execution makes a big difference. The notes in this one are what you might expect from a mash bill consisting of corn, wheat, and malted barley, namely oak, spice, and caramelized sweetness. There's also a lot of orange zest coming through. While these may sound like standard bourbon flavors, the bottle proves that basic is anything but boring. One Flaviar user writes in a review, "Solid pour, not too sweet or spicy. A nice oak and fruit nose. The finish has some caramel and nuts in it. I will display this bottle proudly." Rebel 10-year single barrel bourbon sells for about $80 on Total Wine as of October 2022. However, so be warned, it's on the higher end of bottle prices.
The best bourbon comes from the best corn. Sorry, Kentucky.
Cedar Ridge Whiskey proves that Iowa might be able to give Kentucky a run for its money in the bourbon department. Certainly, the brand's Iowa Straight Bourbon Whiskey is one of the most underrated bottles at the liquor store. Cedar Ridge Bourbon is freakishly smooth. The 86 proof bottle is predominantly made from Iowa corn, with a little rye and malted barley for good measure. The sweet corn flavor remains intact through the finish of this bourbon, with notes of toffee, vanilla, and caramel corn shining through. It's also a bottle that goes for just $40 on Drizzly as of November 2022, and most satisfied customers seem surprised that the distillery doesn't charge more for this must-try bourbon whiskey. One customer wrote on Total Wine, "It was absolutely the smoothest bourbon I have had, but not lacking in complexity. The Iowa corn is evident in its sweetness, but caramel and grassy notes come through nicely." Breckenridge Bourbon not only stands out because it hails from Colorado rather than Kentucky or Tennessee, but also because it is a peppery, high rye spirit. This 86 proof bottle has a deep golden amber color and a rich brown sugar and honey flavor to match. Breckenridge Distillery ages its bourbon for a minimum of 3 years to develop those deep, woody flavors that complement other warm notes of vanilla and caramel. Breckenridge Bourbon is a relatively budget-friendly bottle that sells for $45 on Drizzly as of October 2022, and reviews from customers who have purchased it declare that it's an underrated gem, one that they would be willing to pay much more for. As one customer review on Breckenridge Bourbon reads, "This stuff ruined all my other bourbons. Absolutely the best." Another unexpected knockout bourbon from beyond Kentucky's borders is Pipe Dream Bourbon, which is made by Redwood Empire Whiskey in Sonoma County, California. The first bourbon from the brand is named after the 14th tallest tree on Earth, called the Pipe Dream Tree in Humboldt Redwood State Park. The corn-heavy spirit features a blend aged anywhere from 4 to 12 years. It has the slight sweetness you'd expect, but not as much as some of the other options you'll find in stores. Pipe Dream Bourbon shows its age in a good way, thanks to its complexity, and the woody notes will remind you of the brand's mission. For every bottle sold, Redwood Empire plants a tree, so you can actually feel like you're doing something good by treating yourself to this bourbon. It's also very reasonably priced at $40 a bottle on Total Wine. One customer writes, "I was pretty wowed with this one. I would compare it favorably with Eagle Rare. Lots of flavor for 90 proof and the price point.